A poor nurse was forced to marry a dying billionaire. But when he miraculously survived, he fell. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Her name was Emily Carter, a young nurse in her late 20s. Every day she worked double shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, not because she loved the overtime, but because she had no choice. Her younger brother was in college, her mother's medical bills kept piling up, and the rent on their tiny apartment in Queens was already overdue. Emily's life was a cycle of exhaustion, responsibility, and sacrifice. Yet, despite all of that, she still managed to smile kindly at every patient, still managed to offer comfort with her steady hands and her soft voice. One rainy evening, after a grueling 12-hour shift, she was summoned unexpectedly to the private wing of the hospital. The request was unusual and carried a sense of urgency that made her stomach twist. When she entered the dimly lit room, she was met by two sharply dressed men in black suits. They introduced themselves as legal representatives of Alexander Knight, the billionaire heir whose name dominated newspapers, a man whispered about as both ruthless in business and cursed with a failing heart. Emily's throat tightened. She had never even seen Alexander Knight in person, only glimpsed his face in glossy magazines, usually surrounded by women in glittering gowns or in articles about hostile corporate takeovers. Yet now, he lay unconscious in the hospital bed before her. Pale, frail, a shadow of the powerful figure she had read about. One of the men slid a document across the table. His voice was calm but firm as he explained, "Mr. Knight's last request is simple. He wishes to be married before his time comes. And you, Miss Carter, have been chosen." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? This must be some mistake. I do not know him. Why would he choose me?" The lawyer exchanged a glance with his colleague. "Because Mr. Knight is aware of your reputation. He asked for someone with integrity, someone who would not marry him for money. The contract ensures you will be provided for, but you will not inherit his empire. This is strictly a marriage of formality, nothing more. Sign this document, and your family's debts will vanish overnight." Her heart pounded in her ears. It felt absurd, unreal, like a cruel joke. She wanted to scream, to run, to refuse outright. But then she thought of her mother's prescriptions, the eviction notice folded in her purse, her brother who had skipped meals so she could eat. Reality pressed against her chest like a weight she could not escape. Her voice trembled. "So, you want me to marry a man who is dying?" The lawyer's expression remained unreadable. "Yes, tonight." Tears stung her eyes as she looked at Alexander, his breathing shallow beneath the oxygen mask. He was not the arrogant billionaire from the magazines anymore. He was simply a man, fragile and human, standing at the edge of death. Emily felt as though her world had narrowed to a single choice: walk away and let her family crumble under poverty, or sacrifice her freedom for a stranger who might not even survive the week. Her hand shook as she reached for the pen. In that moment, thunder rolled outside, echoing the turmoil inside her chest. She whispered, almost to herself, "I will do it." And so, under the cold glow of fluorescent hospital lights, Emily Carter signed her name on the contract that would bind her fate to a dying billionaire. What she did not know, what no one could have imagined, was that this marriage, meant to be nothing more than a desperate transaction, would become the very storm that would change both of their lives forever. The wedding happened in silence. No flowers, no music, no smiling faces. Just the sterile smell of disinfectant and the humming of medical machines. Emily Carter stood in a simple white dress borrowed from the hospital chapel, her hands trembling as the vows were spoken. Alexander Knight, pale and unconscious, had to be propped up to respond with the faintest nod. The marriage certificate was signed, witnessed by lawyers, and sealed away. And just like that, Emily Carter became Mrs. Alexander Knight. But the moment the ink dried, everything began to shift. When Alexander regained consciousness a few days later, his icy gray eyes met Emily's for the first time. There was no gratitude, no softness, only suspicion and contempt. His voice, though weak, carried the sharp edge of authority. "So, you are the woman they chose for me? Tell me, Nurse Carter, how much were you paid to sell your freedom?" Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to shout that she had done it for survival, not greed. She wanted to confess that every signature on that paper had felt like a dagger in her chest. But instead, she kept her voice steady. "I did what I had to do. Believe what you want, Mr. Knight. I am not here for your money. I am here because I had no choice." His lips curved in a bitter half-smile. "No choice. That is what they all say. Do not pretend to be different. I have seen enough people betray me to recognize the pattern." From that moment, life inside the Knight penthouse became a battlefield of cold silences and sharp words. The sprawling Manhattan residence was nothing like Emily's cramped apartment in Queens. Crystal chandeliers glowed above marble floors. Every room was filled with priceless art, polished silver, and the echo of footsteps on stone. Yet for Emily, it felt less like a palace and more like a cage. Alexander refused her kindness. When she brought him his medication, he would sneer, "Do you think I need your pity?" When she helped him walk across the room, he would snap, "Keep your hands off me. I do not need a babysitter." But Emily was not the type to be intimidated easily. Though her heart raced, she met his sharp words with calm persistence. "You can hate me if it makes you feel stronger," she told him one evening as she adjusted his IV drip. "But I will still do my job. That is what I promised when I put on this uniform, and that is what I promised when I signed that paper." For the first time, Alexander was silent. His jaw clenched. His eyes flickered with something unreadable, but he said nothing. Still, the clashes continued. At breakfast, he pushed away the meals she prepared, demanding a chef. At night, he ordered the staff to keep her out of his wing, as though she were an intruder. The household employees whispered about the nursewife, their glances filled with judgment. To them, Emily was nothing more than a gold digger who had snared their master in his weakest moment. The sting of humiliation burned her every day. Yet Emily endured, because she had made a vow not of love, but of responsibility. She had chosen to tie her fate to his, and she would not run, no matter how cruel he became. One evening, as thunder rumbled over the Manhattan skyline, Emily stood by the window, staring at the city lights. Alexander's voice came from behind her, quieter than before. "Do you ever regret it?" She turned, surprised by the question. His face was half in shadow, his eyes searching hers with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Emily swallowed hard. "Every day," she admitted honestly. "But regret does not change reality. I am your wife, Mr. Knight, whether either of us wanted it or not." "Oh." For the briefest moment, something cracked in his expression, but then his walls slammed shut again. He scoffed, turned away, and muttered, "Then let us keep this farce exactly as at Island. A marriage of convenience. Nothing more." Emily's chest ached at his words, but she said nothing. Deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. What she did not realize was that beneath Alexander's coldness lay a heart that was far more fragile than his failing body, and that soon, the clashes that kept them apart would become the very sparks that drew them dangerously close. The days dragged on, marked by constant clashes and cold silences. Emily Carter did her duties with quiet determination, while Alexander Knight seemed determined to push her away at every opportunity. Yet, life has a way of exposing cracks, even in the hardest walls. And it was in the smallest, most unexpected moments that Emily began to see a different side of him. It happened one late afternoon. The storm outside had knocked out power for several city blocks, and though the Knight penthouse had its own generator, certain systems flickered and failed. Emily found Alexander in the library, sitting in the dim glow of a single lamp, his sharp suit abandoned for a plain cotton shirt. His hair was slightly tousled, his face pale from fatigue. On the table before him was not a business contract, not a ledger of numbers, but a leather-bound sketchbook. She froze in the doorway, surprised. His hand moved slowly across the page, sketching the outline of a boat on open water. The lines were imperfect, shaky, but full of life. When he noticed her, Alexander quickly snapped the book shut, his expression hardening. Do you make it a habit to spy on people, Mrs. Knight? Emily stepped forward carefully. I was checking to make sure you had not overexerted yourself. I did not know you could draw. His eyes narrowed, defensive. It is nothing. A waste of time. But Emily shook her head. No, it is not nothing. It is human. It is real. For a moment, the silence between them stretched thin, filled only by the patter of rain against the glass. Alexander's shoulders dropped slightly, as though the weight of his bitterness pressed too heavily on him. He did not reply. But he did not send her away, either. Later that night, she noticed another detail. As he slept, his breathing uneven, his hand clutched the sketchbook tightly to his chest, like a lifeline. Emily realized then that beneath the billionaire's arrogance was a man who still held on to dreams, dreams he feared the world would mock. Another glimpse came on a colder night. Alexander attempted to walk without assistance, determined to prove he was not as weak as his doctors claimed. He collapsed halfway down the hall, his body trembling with exhaustion. Emily rushed forward, catching him before he struck the marble floor. For once, he did not resist her touch. His weight leaned against her, his voice barely a whisper. I hate this. I hate feeling helpless. Her arms tightened around him, steady and strong. You are still alive. That is what matters. Weakness is not shameful. Giving up Island, his eyes flickered open, searching her face. There was no sarcasm this time, no biting remark. Just a raw vulnerability he could not hide. From that night onward, his hostility softened only slightly, but enough for Emily to notice. He no longer rejected every meal she prepared. He allowed her to adjust his medications without protest. And sometimes, when he thought she was not looking, his gaze lingered on her with quiet curiosity. The staff noticed too. Whispers began to circulate that the nurse wife had managed to calm the tempestuous billionaire. Emily ignored the gossip, focusing instead on her duties. But in her heart, she could not deny that something was shifting. One evening, as she sat by his bedside reading aloud from an old novel, Alexander interrupted her. Why do you bother? You could leave. You fulfilled your part of the contract. No one would stop you. Emily closed the book gently. Because walking away would make me a liar. I promised to stay, even if it was only on paper. And I keep my promises. For the first time, Alexander's expression softened fully. He looked at her, not as a gold digger or an intruder, but as someone he could not quite figure out. Someone who confused him, unsettled him. Someone who might be stronger than he had ever realized. Emily did not know it yet, but these small glimpses of humanity, his sketchbook, his whispered confessions, his unguarded silence were planting seeds. Seeds that would one day grow into something far more powerful than either of them expected. The uneasy peace between Emily Carter and Alexander Knight did not last long. His health, though steadier than before, was still fragile. Each day was a battle between hope and despair. Emily watched him closely, never missing a dosage, never letting fatigue pull him under. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the night. Everything changed. It was just past midnight when the sound of alarms pierced through the penthouse. Emily rushed into Alexander's bedroom to find him slumped against the bed, his skin drenched in sweat, his chest heaving as though every breath was a war. The monitors blared in frantic rhythm, flashing warnings she had seen before but prayed never to face again. "Alexander!" she cried, rushing to his side. His eyes fluttered open, dazed, pain etched across his face. I cannot." His voice broke, his body convulsing as he struggled for air. Training took over. Emily grabbed the emergency kit, her hands steady though her heart thundered in her chest. She adjusted the oxygen mask, checked his pulse, administered the injection that could stabilize him. Her voice was firm, determined, speaking directly to him even though she knew he might not hear. "Stay with me. Do not you dare give up. You are not leaving tonight." Minutes felt like hours. Sweat rolled down her back as she fought for his life, whispering words of defiance against the silence threatening to swallow the room. Finally, the monitors began to slow, the sharp beeping settling into a steady rhythm. Alexander's breathing evened out, his chest rising and falling with exhausted relief. Emily collapsed into the chair beside him, tears blurring her vision. For the first time, she realized how much she wanted him to live, not just as her patient, not just as her responsibility, but as a man whose life mattered deeply to her. When morning came, the doctors reviewed his condition and delivered news no one had expected. "It is remarkable," one of them said, glancing at the charts. "Mr. Knight's body is responding better than predicted. With the right care, his chances of survival have increased significantly." The household was stunned. Whispers spread like wildfire. The dying billionaire might actually live. Alexander heard the news with a mixture of disbelief and pride. He looked at Emily, his voice hoarse but steady. "You saved me." Again. Emily shook her head. "You fought. I only helped." For the first time, there was no sarcasm in his eyes, no bitterness, just quiet acknowledgement. But their ordeal brought new complications. His family, long distant and disconnected, suddenly reappeared. Reporters began circling like vultures, hungry for a story. And in the midst of it all, the truth of their contract loomed like a shadow. To the public, Alexander Knight was no longer a man at death's door. He was alive, recovering, and very much married. His family demanded explanations, the press demanded photographs, and investors demanded reassurance. That was when Alexander made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. At breakfast one morning, he placed his sketchbook aside and looked directly at Emily. His tone was calm but resolute. "We cannot let the world know this marriage was a contract. If they find out, it will destroy both of us. From now on, we present ourselves as husband and wife, for real, at least, in public." Emily's spoon clattered against her plate. "You mean, we pretend?" Alexander's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Exactly. You wanted a contract marriage. Now you will have to play the role to perfection. Galas, dinners, interviews. You will stand by my side, as Mrs. Knight." Her heart pounded in her chest. The thought of entering his glittering, cutthroat world terrified her, but she saw no alternative. To refuse would mean exposing everything, and that would not only ruin him, but humiliate her family as well. She lifted her chin, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. "Fine. But remember this. I am not here to play dress-up. I will not let anyone use me as a prop." Alexander studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. I would not want a weak partner anyway." And so, what had begun as a desperate transaction in a hospital room transformed into something far more dangerous. A forced partnership under the scrutiny of the world. A fragile arrangement that demanded closeness neither of them had ever wanted. Neither Emily nor Alexander could know it then. But this turning point, the night she pulled him back from the edge of death, and the morning he chose to live, as her husband in public, was the spark that would ignite a fire neither contract nor pride could contain. The decision had been made. From that day forward, Emily Carter was no longer just a nurse bound by a contract. She was Alexander Knight's wife in the public eye. And the world was eager to see them together. Their first public appearance came only a week later, at a high-profile charity gala hosted in the heart of Manhattan. Emily's hands trembled as she slipped into a gown chosen by Alexander's personal stylist, a shimmering navy dress that felt foreign against her modest upbringing. The penthouse driver escorted them in a sleek black limousine, and as they arrived at the glittering venue, camera flashes erupted like fireworks. "Smile," Alexander murmured as he adjusted his cufflinks, his expression calm, commanding. "Every eye in this room is watching. From tonight on, we are no longer a contract. We are husband and wife." Emily's pulse raced, but she forced her lips into a steady smile as his hand slipped around her waist. Together, they stepped onto the red carpet. Reporters shouted their names, microphones thrust forward, demanding answers about the sudden marriage of the elusive billionaire. Alexander's arm tightened around Emily, pulling her close. His voice carried authority as he told the crowd, "Yes, this is my wife. We chose privacy before, but now I am proud to stand beside her." The words sent shockwaves across the flashing lights, and Emily felt her knees weaken. For the first time, he had claimed her publicly, not as a caretaker, not as a stranger, but as his partner. Inside the ballroom, whispers followed them. Women in diamonds and silk gowns studied Emily with thinly veiled disdain, their voices dripping with suspicion. "She is nothing but a nurse. How did she trap him?" Emily's cheeks burned, but before she could retreat, Alexander's voice cut through the murmur. "Is there a problem?" he asked coldly, his piercing eyes silencing the gossipers. For the first time, he shielded her, his presence a wall against the venom of the elite. Throughout the night, the charade continued. Emily danced with Alexander beneath the chandeliers, her steps awkward at first, until his hand steadied hers. His gaze softened, just enough for her to forget, for one fleeting moment, that all of this was pretend. But the forced proximity extended far beyond the gala. Every day brought new events, interviews, and dinners. Emily found herself constantly at Alexander's side, navigating his glittering world of wealth and scrutiny. They posed for photographs, exchanged practiced smiles, and fielded invasive questions from the press. Behind closed doors, the act became more complicated. Sharing the same home meant constant interaction, constant closeness. In the kitchen, their hands brushed as they reached for the same glass. In the library, she caught him sketching again, his defenses lowered in the quiet hours of the night. Yet the more time they spent together, the harder it became to separate the performance from reality. Emily began to notice the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking, the way his voice softened when he said her name. And Alexander, in turn, began to recognize the fire in her spirit, the unshakable dignity she carried even when surrounded by scorn. One evening, after a long dinner with investors, Emily slipped off her heels in the limousine, groaning softly in relief. Alexander glanced at her, amused. "Not used to this life, are you?" She met his gaze, weary but unwavering. "I never asked for this life, but if I am going to stand beside you, I will not let them see me stumble." For a moment, silence filled the car. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander chuckled. A genuine laugh, low and warm, breaking through the walls of pride. It was in those moments, both public and private, that the lines between obligation and something deeper began to blur. The world believed their marriage was real, and slowly, dangerously, Emily and Alexander began to wonder if it might be. The days of forced appearances soon gave way to something more complicated. What began as a performance for cameras and investors started to blur into real connection. As Emily Carter and Alexander Knight were pushed closer not only by circumstance, but by the truths they slowly revealed to each other. One quiet afternoon, Emily found Alexander in the garden of the penthouse. The city skyline stretched out behind him, but his attention was fixed on the small sketchbook balanced on his knee. His pencil moved carefully across the page, bringing to life the outline of a cabin tucked in the woods, smoke rising from its chimney. "You dream of escaping all of this," Emily said softly, stepping closer. Alexander glanced up, startled, then closed the book halfway. "It is nothing, just idle thoughts. People do not sketch their fantasies unless they matter," she replied. "You want peace, a place where no one is watching you." His lips pressed into a thin line, but he did not deny it. Instead, his voice grew quiet. "When I was a boy, my father dragged me to every boardroom, every meeting, every ruthless negotiation. I never wanted any of it. All I ever wanted was freedom. But I learned early that freedom does not exist for people like me." Emily's chest tightened at the vulnerability in his tone. She sat beside him, her voice steady. "Freedom exists. You just have to fight for the kind that matters." For the first time, Alexander did not shut her out. He let her see the cracks in his armor, the weariness beneath the billionaire facade. Later that evening, it was Emily's turn to confess. They sat in the dim glow of the library, silence stretching between them. She told him about her mother's illness, the endless hospital bills that had driven her to exhaustion. She spoke of her younger brother, juggling classes and part-time jobs, and how she had worked herself to the bone so he would not give up his dreams. Alexander listened without interruption. When she finished, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "You carried all of that alone. No one ever stood beside you?" Emily shook her head. "There was no one to stand beside me, but I survived. That is what matters." For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. Then slowly, he reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. It was not a gesture of ownership, but of understanding. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest, a fragile thread of connection binding them together. From then on, the atmosphere between them shifted. Their conversations grew longer, their silences more comfortable. Alexander began to trust her with details he had never shared with anyone: his fears of failure, his regrets about the ruthless decisions that had earned him both fortune and enemies. And Emily, in turn, discovered moments of gentleness in him. Small, but undeniable. The staff noticed the change, too. No longer did Alexander snap at Emily in front of them. Instead, he defended her, even praised her when she stood firm against criticism. Whispers spread through the halls, not of disdain, but of curiosity. Was the nurse-wife becoming the real heart of the Knight household? One evening, as the city lights glittered outside the penthouse windows, Emily poured tea while Alexander reviewed business documents. Without looking up, he said quietly, "I do not know when it happened, but I have stopped seeing you as just a contract." Her hand froze midair, her pulse quickening. She wanted to answer, but words failed her. Instead, she placed the cup before him and met his gaze. His gray eyes, once so cold, now held something she could not ignore. Neither of them spoke the word love. It was too soon, too fragile. But the bond had been forged, undeniable and real. And though the world still believed their marriage was nothing but a performance, Emily and Alexander both knew the truth was changing one quiet, powerful moment at a time. For weeks, Emily Carter and Alexander Knight had built something fragile, yet undeniable, a bond neither of them had expected. But peace, in their world, was never meant to last. It began with whispers. A tabloid headline, bold and merciless, appeared one morning. "The nurse who married a billionaire, contract or true love." Emily froze when she saw the newspaper on the breakfast table. Her stomach twisted as she scanned the article. Details that no reporter should have known were laid out in black and white: the sudden marriage at the hospital, the lack of a wedding celebration, the whispers of lawyers present that night. Her hands shook as she looked across the table at Alexander. His face was stone, but his jaw was tight. "Who leaked this?" he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. The article spread like wildfire. By noon, television anchors were speculating. By evening, investors demanded explanations. Social media drowned in accusations that Emily had married him for money, that she was a fraud who had preyed on a dying man. At the penthouse gates, reporters gathered in swarms. Their voices echoed through the marble halls. "Mrs. Knight, how much did he pay you? Did you trick him into signing a contract? Are you just another gold digger?" Emily could not escape their words. Even the staff, who had begun to respect her, now cast wary glances. The humiliation was suffocating. That night, as she stood alone in the darkened library, her reflection wavered in the glass. Her chest ached with shame. She whispered to herself, "Maybe they are right. Maybe I was a fool to think this could ever be real." No, but the real blow came not from the press, but from Alexander's own family. His older sister stormed into the penthouse, her voice sharp with fury. "Do you know what you have done to our family name? You brought in a nurse, an outsider, and pretended she was your wife? Do you realize how pathetic this looks?" Emily's cheeks burned, but she stood her ground. "I did not ask for any of this. I never wanted your fortune. I only—" "Enough," the sister snapped. "You are a liar, and when this sham falls apart, everyone will see you for what you really are." The words cut deeper than Emily expected. But the silence that followed hurt most of all. Alexander stood in the doorway, his eyes shadowed, his lips pressed thin. He said nothing. Emily's breath caught. She had endured the press, the gossip, even the cruel accusations of strangers. But his silence, his refusal to defend her, was unbearable. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Do you believe them too?" Alexander did not answer. And in that hollow pause, Emily felt the fragile bond they had built begin to fracture. The storm had come, and this time, it threatened to tear everything apart. The scandal grew like wildfire. Every news channel replayed the same footage. Alexander Knight silent beside his wife while the accusations raged on. For Emily Carter, the silence was louder than any words. It was the sound of betrayal. She withdrew into herself, retreating to the quiet corners of the penthouse, avoiding the cameras, the staff, even Alexander. Yet no matter how hard she tried to disappear, the world would not let her. Everywhere she turned, the headlines screamed the same thing: gold digger, liar, fraud. One evening, unable to bear the weight of it any longer, Emily packed a small bag. Standing by the door, she whispered to herself, "I was never meant to be here. This is not my world." But just as her hand touched the handle, a voice echoed behind her. "Leaving will not silence them." She froze. Alexander stood in the hallway, his eyes darker than she had ever seen. "You think walking away will prove your innocence?" "No, Emily. It will only make their lies stronger." Her chest ached, frustration spilling over. "Then what am I supposed to do? Sit here while the world tears me apart? While your own family calls me a thief?" You stood there and said nothing. You let them destroy me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, Alexander crossed the room and opened the door, not to let her leave, but to step out himself. "Come with me. There is only one way to end this." The next morning, the press conference was announced. Cameras lined the hall of the night corporate headquarters. Investors, reporters, and family members crowded into the space, waiting for the spectacle. Emily stood at Alexander's side, her hands trembling, her heart pounding. She wanted to run, but his grip on her hand was firm, unyielding. When he stepped to the microphone, the room fell silent. His voice was steady, commanding, echoing against the walls. "Yes, it is true. My marriage to Emily Carter began as a contract. She was chosen to stand beside me when I believed I was dying. I asked her, and she agreed, not for fortune, not for power, but because she understood duty. Because she was brave enough to accept when no one else would." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily's knees nearly buckled. Alexander continued, his voice gaining strength. "But what began as an agreement has become the most real thing in my life. This woman is not a liar. She is not a thief. She saved my life when doctors said it was impossible. She gave me back hope when I had none left. And whether you approve or not, she is my wife. She is my choice. And she is my love." The room erupted in chaos. Questions, shouts, cameras, flashing wildly. But all Emily could hear was the pounding of her own heart. He had said it, publicly, fearlessly. He had chosen her. Tears blurred her vision as Alexander turned to her, his eyes unwavering. In that moment, the world could scream whatever it wanted. The truth had finally been spoken. The press conference ended in chaos. But the message was clear. Alexander Knight had made his choice. And it was Emily Carter. The scandal that once threatened to ruin her now turned against those who had mocked her. Headlines shifted almost overnight. Billionaire defends wife with emotional confession. From contract to true love, Alexander Knight's stunning reveal. The same reporters, who once called Emily a fraud, now begged for interviews. Desperate to capture the love story the world had nearly destroyed. But Emily did not care for their words. What mattered was the moment after the cameras stopped rolling. When the crowd dispersed and the doors closed, Alexander turned to her, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I should have defended you from the beginning. I failed you, but I will not fail again." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she shook her head. "You did not fail. You stood up when it mattered most." From that day forward, Alexander's promise was not just spoken, but proven in action. He used his influence to silence the cruelest voices in the media, not with threats, but with undeniable truth. He invited Emily's family to the penthouse, ensuring her mother received the best medical care, ensuring her brother's education was fully supported. In the eyes of the world, she was no longer the nurse who had tricked a dying billionaire. She was the woman who had stood by him in sickness, who had fought for his life when no one else believed he could survive. Respect replaced ridicule, dignity replaced disdain. But for Emily, the greatest change was not in the headlines or the whispers of the elite. It was in Alexander himself. The cold, guarded man she had first married was gone. In his place stood someone who no longer hid behind walls of pride, someone who reached for her hand, not out of obligation, but out of love. One evening, as the sun set over the Manhattan skyline, Alexander brought her to the penthouse garden. He opened his sketchbook and revealed the drawing he had been working on in secret. It was not a yacht, not a mansion, but a simple cabin in the woods, the same dream he had once confessed. "This," he said quietly, "is what I want with you. A place where no cameras follow, no contracts bind us. Just us. Real. Free." Emily's heart swelled. She touched the page gently, then lifted her eyes to his. "Then let us build it." Together. Hoplay. In that moment, the marriage that had begun as a desperate contract in a hospital room became something unshakable. Not a performance, not a bargain, but a partnership forged through fire. And as Alexander pulled Emily into his arms beneath the fading light, the truth was undeniable. Love, real love, had triumphed over pride, scandal, and the weight of the world. Their story was no longer one of obligation. It was a story of choice, a story of redemption, a story of two souls who found freedom, not in escape, but in each other.